Namaste, good evening, and once again a very warm welcome to all of you. How does one speak of an art historian who is a respected speaker at a breathtakingly long list of prestigious universities and museums around the world, yet art history is only one part of his life mission? He is a filmmaker who has made over 140 deeply researched documentary films. He is an eminent photographer, Buddhist scholar, and a record-setting traveler. He is the person who, for the first time, photographed the Buddhist painting of Ajanta in their true colors and detail. His book, The Ajanta Caves, is the most widely read book on Indian art history in the world. Behl's book, The Art of India, Sculpture and Mural Paintings in 2 volumes, has recently been published by the Hindu Group of Publications. This is a rare book which presents Indian art from all over the vast country, including remote and very high altitude regions. Mr. Behl's series of 26 films on the history of painting in India, 26 films on the history of sculpture of India, 12 films on the story of Buddhism, as well as other films on various cultural subjects are regularly screened in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, London, Berlin, Beijing, Tokyo, Kyoto, and numerous other cities of the world. His films have also won, as he just told you, numerous international awards at festivals across the world. Mr. Behl is the first Indian about whom the American National Geographic magazine has done a major story. BBC World News have carried 3 news items about his work in India and in Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, author, art historian, and filmmaker Benoy K Behl will this evening take you on an enthralling journey through the history of mural paintings in India. Before his work, the history of Indian painting was studied from the medieval period onwards. Behl's documentation, which you are going to see now, has clearly established the fact that there was a continuous and great tradition of painting in India coming right from ancient times. This is a talk which has been delivered at the most prestigious universities and museums of the world, including the Rashtrapati Bhavan Museum. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now have the pleasure of presenting Mr. Behl to you. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My many thanks to Professor Nirendra Mohan for his very kind invitation to come here to share some beautiful aspects of Indian culture with all of you. My many thanks also to Mr. Akshay Panda, the president of this beautiful temple complex, which it has been a great pleasure to see and to be here. My very deeply felt thanks also to Mr. Arun Bhargav, who has been extremely kind to us, to Sujata and myself since yesterday, to Mr. Sudesh Chhabra and Dr. and Mrs. Sane. In fact, I must say that it is truly a very warm feeling to be here, and a great pleasure to be sharing these aspects of Indian culture with all of you. And indeed, it is a very special tradition of art and culture that we have. When I had the privilege of photographing the Ajanta paintings for the first time about 26 years ago, I was invited suddenly by so many of the major museums and institutions of the world to show those photographs and to lecture upon the paintings. And you would be happy to know that there was a unanimous response, whether it was in Washington DC or New York at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or whether it was at the British Museum, or whether it was in Paris, or whether it was in Japan, in Tokyo. There was a unanimous response that surely this must be the finest art of humankind. And not just for art of the 5th century period, but the finest of art coming right up till the present. But even more, it was when I photographed the 10th century, previously not photographed paintings of Brihadishvara temple at Thanjavur, that historians around the world said to me that we have to revise our understanding of the history of Indian painting. I remember this being said to me very clearly by Dr. Milo Beach, who was the director of the 2 American National Museums of Asian Art at the Smithsonian Institution. And I said, Milo, why is that? Why would you need to revise your understanding of the history of Indian painting? So he said to me that the paintings of Ajanta were known, but paintings before Ajanta and paintings for 800 years after Ajanta were not known. Therefore, these great paintings were somehow treated like a flash in the pan and were not appreciated as part of a continuous tradition of painting, of great art. And the 10th century paintings which he was looking upon now, which had the same technical virtuosity as the 5th century Ajanta paintings, showed that there was obviously a continuous tradition of most wonderful art in the ancient period in India. And what makes these paintings so beautiful and so important, besides the technical virtuosity, of which there is ample, for these paintings are found to be having in them the qualities which, for instance, Western art began to acquire 1,000 years later during the High Renaissance, and then later beyond that during the period of Impressionist paintings and Expressionist paintings, and coming right up to the modern day. But more than the technical virtuosity, it is a vision of life which they contain. It is a marvelous vision of life which sees a great oneness in all that there is. It sees the same in you, in me, in each of us, in the animals, the birds, the trees, the flowers, all that there is. And therefore, there is a great compassion in the touch of the painter. It is this which makes this tradition of art uniquely beautiful and of great value to the world. The philosophy of aesthetics was developed at a very early period in India. In this, it is believed that the moment when we look upon something beautiful, when we respond to something beautiful, whether it is in nature like a beautiful sunrise, or whether it is looking upon a beautiful work of art, that moment is in fact akin to Brahmananda itself, the final bliss of salvation itself. For in that moment, the veils of illusion of the material world, Maya or Mithya, our so many fretful concerns in the material world are lifted, and we are looking upon the grace which underlies all that there is. And that is why art has been so important in the Indian traditions. And there has been this huge, this vast corpus of art which has been created over the centuries. This very special art coming from the ancient period. In looking upon this art, there is another thing which we must always remember, that the deities of the Indian traditions, the deities that you see in the art, are personifications of the qualities inside you. They're personifications of the wisdom, the compassion, the grace, the kindness, the wonderful qualities inside you. You look upon the deities, you are moved by the deities, you meditate upon the deities, and responding to their grace, you awaken that same grace within yourself. Until one day it is hoped that that grace may grow within you and fill you completely, and then you have become the deity. Now that is the noble purpose of Indian art. We also have a marvelous treatise on art making, the Chitra Sutra, which was penned out of ongoing earlier traditions by about the 5th century. And that spells out also that this is the purpose of art. It is to emancipate you, it is to show you this marvelous grace. It is not just to present optical reality before you. And this is an enchanted place, the gorge of the Vaghora river in Western India, in Maharashtra, where 31 caves were excavated in 2 phases. The first phase around the 2nd century BC and the second phase around the 5th century AD. Now the caves are Buddhist caves. But it's very important to remember that in ancient India there was absolutely no distinction between Hindus, Buddhists or Jains. In fact, in the 2nd century period, the rulers at that time were the Satvahans, who worshipped Hindu deities. In the 5th century period, the rulers here at that time were the Vakatakas, who also worshipped Hindu deities. In fact, it's important to remember that from what we see of the inscriptions of ancient India, every single family that we know about from ancient India had in it people who were worshipping Shiva or Vishnu, people who were worshipping Buddha, or people who were worshipping Mahavira. So the strict divisions between religions are really a later colonial construct. It was a marvelous philosophic path, and there were no divisions between faiths in ancient India. Next, please. Now, the caves of Ajanta have dark interiors, and the Archaeological Survey of India does not allow the use of strong lights. In fact, the only lights which have been permitted were lights running on electricity coming through a dimmer at low voltage, casting only such orangish light upon the paintings, and consequently this is how the paintings were always seen. They were of course still considered this very important fountainhead of the classic tradition of painting of Asia, but this is how they were seen. Next, please. Whereas the true colors of that painting are like this. I was credited with developing a technique of photographing in very low light, loosely called darkness sometimes. But with this technique I was able to capture the true colors of these great ancient Indian paintings, especially the blues and greens which did not come out in the orangish light. And this is in cave 1. It is of around the 5th century, and this is a princely figure bearing an offering of lotuses for the Bodhisattva Vajrapani. Next please. And this in front of him is the Bodhisattva Vajrapani. As you would know, Bodhisattva means a being on his way to salvation, and Vajrapani means the bearer of the thunderbolt. The thunderbolt has been a constant and very important symbol in Indian thought and Indian art. Lord Indra, who is among the very earliest deities that are seen in Indian art, bears the thunderbolt, and the latest form of Buddhism, which the people of Tibet and His Holiness the Dalai Lama and others follow, is also the Vajrayana school of Buddhism, the vehicle of the thunderbolt. You see him here with this glorious crown, bringing before us the majesty of the Spirit inside you. Next please. Also in cave 1 of the 5th century, the Bodhisattva Padmapani, whereas the Vajrapani brought the majesty of the Spirit in front of us, the Padmapani brings before us the peace of the Spirit. To your left, over his right shoulder, you would see that kinnar, part human, part bird, playing musical instrument, string musical instrument in the 5th century. To his left, to your right that is, you would see the geese and you would see the monkeys playing. Yet, you would notice that, next please, he looks within. It is this life of the Spirit within. It is this journey within which is a constant theme of this ancient art of India. There is a peace and a joy to be found within, which is the constant search. Next please. On the same wall as the Padmapani, a couple in harmony, a sense of harmony which completely pervades the world of the Ajanta paintings. For indeed it is a world. There are thousands of figures painted here, and all of them are full of compassion. All of them show great expressions of caring for each other. It is a marvelous world of harmony that they present. If you notice the gradual lightening and deepening of color which persuades your eye of the roundedness of form, this rendering of form is a well-known part of the tradition of painting which is seen beginning at Ajanta. And you would be happy to know that in all the Asian countries, they recognize their debt to the Ajanta tradition. The art historians of Sri Lanka, when they are talking about their most beautiful paintings in the Sigiriya caves, speak always of their connectedness to the paintings of Ajanta. The historians of China, when they are talking about the paintings of the Dunhuang caves, always like to point out the tradition which comes from Ajanta. The art historians of Japan, when they are talking about their most beautiful classic paintings in the Horyuji temple, refer always to the tradition of Ajanta. The art historians in Myanmar, when I was lecturing there, they were fascinated to come and see the paintings of Ajanta and the Indian tradition, because they recognize so deeply that connection and the art which traveled to them from the eastern plains of India. Next, please. On the left wall of cave 1, the Mahajanak Jatak. King Mahajanak is one of the previous births of Gautama Siddhartha, who will gain enlightenment and become a Buddha. And you see him here on the figure near the center on the ground, listening to the sermon of this hermit. And you might notice the antelope, who listened with as much rapt attention as any of the human figures. For in the vision of this artist, there is indeed no difference between the animals and the human beings. They are all beings in this world. I'll take you to a closer view. Next, please. Could you put off some of these lights? They're shining a bit too much in the eyes. And I show you this closer view of King Mahajanak. He was a great and glorious king, a powerful king, who had in fact won back the lands which had earlier been lost by his father. But you see the humility with which he sits on the ground and looks up at the hermit with a look of adoration upon his face. An expression which even the damage of so many centuries has not managed to remove. It is this humility with which we rise. It is this humility which is the subject of this art. Next, please. And having heard that sermon, King Mahajanak decides to give up his palace life, to give up his kingly life, and to go into the forest to be an ascetic. And you see him here announcing this decision in the palace. His mother is behind him, and next please. In front of him is his wife, Queen Shivali. Now, the Chitra Sutra, the oldest known treatise on art making, gives thousands of guidelines to the painter on how to make different kinds of human beings, how to make animals, how to make trees, how to make landscapes, 5 different ways to carry out shading. And among other things, it gives 5 different shapes of eyes which are to be made to convey different expressions. And Queen Shivali's eyes made here are made exactly in the shape of a person who is sad or weeping, as very well she may be, for she hears her husband saying that he is going to go away to become an ascetic. Her lower garment is woven in the form of ikat, which you know continues in India till today, both in the western part of the Deccan and the eastern part of the Deccan. The upper garment, for there is an upper garment, and you would notice some design upon it at her hip, reminds you of the fact that India was at that time known for its extremely fine textiles, which were practically transparent. You are reminded that Pliny the Elder was writing in the 1st century that Roman coffers are being emptied for buying too many fine textiles from India. Emperor Vesuvian was saying practically the same thing a century later. Yes, please, thank you. We can have it off. It's better. And in fact, it has not enough been noted in world history that the Deccan was one of the most cosmopolitan places in the world in the last centuries of the BC period and in the first 5 centuries at least of the AD period. You do know that there were Greek colonies in Maharashtra, and Greeks are among the people who patronized the sculptures in many of the Buddhist caves. They were Greek devotees. In fact, practically the earliest known Hindu antiquity is the Heliodorus pillar at Vidisha in central India, which was the donation of a Greek by that name, Heliodorus. In the early centuries of the AD period, there were many colonies of Roman traders in Andhra Pradesh. And in fact, the eastern coast of India was a fine retrading center also, where goods came in from Southeast Asia and were picked up by the Romans and others. But there was a very cosmopolitan culture. There was a great deal of prosperity which used to in fact amaze foreign visitors who have written about it, and it is reflected in the sophistication of the art. Absolutely remarkable art, way ahead of most other places in the world for many centuries after this period also. The Deccan really is an area which should be studied a great deal more. Next please. These are palace maids who are responding to the same news with shock and with sadness. You see the shock written clearly upon the face of the maid below, and you see the sadness upon the faces of the other two. And indeed it is this caring about others which is so often seen in the Ajanta paintings. I will share with you that besides the bodhisattvas and very fine noble figures that are painted at Ajanta, it is these figures on the side who show so much warmth and caring for others, which moved me immensely in the time that I spent at Ajanta. And I had the fortune to spend a great deal of time in those caves because I was shooting with very, very long exposures going up to 20 minutes for taking one photograph. So there's a lot of time, and it was just wonderful to be enveloped in this world of caring and warmth. Next please. Having taken that decision, Mahajanak is seen here riding out of the palace. And you would see that that inward look has already come into his eyes. He begins on another journey, an inward journey, a much more important journey. Next please. Cave 17 of Ajanta, the Vishwantara Jatak, the dark figure Prince Vishwantar, is the last birth of the Bodhisattva before he will be born as Gautama Siddhartha, who will gain enlightenment. And here, for other reasons, he is going to leave the palace and go into the forest to be an ascetic. And he's telling his wife, Princess Madri, that she would not be used to the difficult life outside, so she should stay back. But Princess Madri decides to go with him. Now if you look at the purse that she holds in her hand, you would notice the curve of the purse strings, which persuades your eye of their movement, that she is swinging that purse. It is marvelous details like this which are also mentioned in the Chitra Sutra. The Chitra Sutra of the 5th century expects the painter, expects very high standards of the painter. It expects the painter to be able to show the movement of the leaves in the breeze, to be able to show the movement of the waves in the water, all this in that unmoving medium of painting. You would notice the perspective in the receding pillars. You would notice the elliptical mouth of the vessel which this man is carrying. Indeed, for so many reasons, people around the world, art experts around the world, are completely amazed when they see these 5th century paintings from India. Next, please. In cave 17, the Mahisha Jatak. Lord Buddha born in a previous birth as a Mahisha, a buffalo. The pesky monkey is troubling him, but the kindly Bodhisattva does not mind. And I'm sure you can see the smile on the face of the Mahisha, as the artist would have intended you to. For there is absolutely no difference between any other beings, us human beings, and this Mahisha with his kindly nature. Next, please. This is also cave 17, and I showed you this to show you how indeed the artist had the whole of creation in his vision. In this Shrilanka Jatak, the artist shows us large elephants, and at the same time, if you would look at the branch of the tree close to this man's head, I'll take you to a closer view. Next, please. And those are ants climbing up that tree. For indeed, as all of us know, any of us could have been born as ants at some point. Next, please. Again, paintings of the 5th century, rarely seen, very rarely seen. Pital Khoda caves, about an hour's drive away from the well-known caves of Ellora, not very far from Ajanta. And there is so much damage, but that gentleness of expression, which is in itself the theme of this ancient art, still survives. Next, please. Again, 5th century, the Bagh caves of central India, Madhya Pradesh. These caves would have been on a trade route which connected Vidisha in central India, which was a great granary also at that time of that part of the country, with the ports which were on the western coast. Nalla Supara, where Mumbai is at present, was a great port, and there was also a 3rd century BC stupa made there. And for a 5th century painting, you may be surprised to see the foreshortening of the bull, and the graphic quality of this art is probably more like what you expect in modern art. Next, please. The earliest murals that survive of the Hindu tradition. This is at Badami. It is the 6th century. And again, that infinite gentleness, which is the theme of the art. One must also remember that it is the same artists who were painting for the Buddhist, Hindu, Jaina and other faiths. And a very important thing to understand about ancient Indian art and ancient Indian monuments is that all the monuments of ancient India were a creation of the people, not directly patronized by the kings. If you were to go to a monument like Sanchi, the great stupa of Sanchi, 631 inscriptions still survive out of perhaps what may have been 2,000 or 3,000 inscriptions originally, in which in one someone is saying, I am a fisherman and I have patronized the making of this pillar. I am a housewife and I have patronized the making of this architrave. I am a farmer. I am a nun. I have patronized the making of this part of the monument. So kings were not directly making religious monuments, but it was the people. It was a wonderful system in society where people understood their own responsibility to their traditions. The kings followed up with grants of the revenue of villages for the upkeep of all the institutions of the various faiths. But the making of any monument to any faith, even the faith of the king himself, was never done. It is much later, it is by the 7th, 8th century that the kings, begins with the Pallavas of South India. That is when the kings start directly patronizing the making of monuments. So this is this most wonderful Indian tradition. Next please. Ellora, 8th century, a Jain cave, a ceiling painting on a Jain cave. And here you see the beginning of the medieval idiom in Indian art. You would notice that the painting is more abstracted. And if you were to look closely, you might notice the protruding further eye beyond the line of the face, which became a hallmark of Jain miniature paintings in the centuries to come. Next please. And the 7th century Kailashnath temple at Kanchipuram, Lord Shiva. There is an ambulatory running around the temple, and this ambulatory has these small niches which are made next to it or within. These niches are made within the ambulatory. Very small niches. It's very difficult, in fact, to even take a photograph there because there's hardly enough space to be able to push in one's head and shoulders. And inside are these exquisite paintings, among the most beautiful and earliest of the tradition of Hindu paintings. Next please. Again, 7th century, Pallava period, the Talagirishvara temple at Panimalai, a very remote village in Tamil Nadu. Painting which has hardly been seen because of how remote this temple is, and also because that shrine is kept locked. In fact, I'll share with you that the first time I managed to reach here, there were 2 locks on the door of the shrine. One, the key was with the Archaeological Survey of India, person, and the key to the other lock was with the priest. Now we had one person and one key, I forget which one, but we did not have the other, so we could not photograph this. But the next time, in 2005, when I managed to reach there again, we had the good fortune of being able to organize both the people in advance and together. And we had the joy of photographing this beautiful Parvati, Shivakami. It is a fine philosophic concept in which the eternal dance of Shiva cannot be without Parvati as the eternal witness. And when she looks upon him dancing, she is Shivakami. So whenever you pick up a Nataraja figure, you must look for her, otherwise it is not a Nataraja. And the tenderness of expression upon her face surely makes this one of the masterpieces of world art. Next please. The Jain tradition again a very remote part of Tamil Nadu, Sittanavasal caves. Beautiful place, very remote, forested, a lot of peacocks around. And this is a scene on the ceiling of this Jain cave, where figures are made collecting lotuses to put on the memorial of a Jain saint. You would notice that the artist treats the lotuses with as much gentle care as the human figure. Next please. And the gentleness upon the face of the figure is absolutely remarkable. Next please. The great Brihadishvara temple dedicated to the great Lord Shiva, end of the 10th century, Tanjavur. Now, we had observed the fact that temples were being patronized directly by kings in Tamil Nadu from the 7th, 8th century onwards. And this led to many changes in the art and in the temples. For instance, the early temples were always very small temples. They could not be seen from far away. But to gain knowledge, you had to make the effort yourself. As a matter of fact, some of the early caves were made leaving outcrops of rock standing in front of the cave. So you literally had to come up to the cave itself to be able to see it. But with the patronage shifting to the kings, these changes begin to take place, and in the end of the 10th century, when the Brihadishvara temple was built, it may have been one of the tallest structures in the world at that time. And the temple was made as much to show the grandeur of the king who made it, as much as the grandeur of the great Lord Shiva. If you look to the left of the temple tower, it's not easy to make out in this picture, but there is a metal ladder going up, and this takes one up to an inner ambulatory which runs around the Shivalinga, the shrine of the temple. And this ambulatory has paintings inside which go up to a height of about 20 feet, and there is only about 5.5 feet of space between the inner and outer wall. Therefore, you do not have much distance from which you see these great paintings, and the effect is even more impressive, as I'm sure it was meant to be. Next please. And these are those marvelous paintings of the end of the 10th century. Sundarar, a Shaivite saint, is seen here going up to Lord Shiva, and he is on Eravat, the elephant of Lord Indra. Next, please. And one of the finest paintings of Shiva is the Nataraja. You might notice the smile upon his face. And he's seen here dancing under the canopy, the golden canopy of the Chidambaram temple, which had already been completed at that time. Next, please. Oh, can we go back? I thought I'd like to mention that the Chidambaram temple. The Chidambaram temple has the most revered Shiva Linga of Tamil Nadu. There are these silver curtains in front, and when you move the curtains and look beyond, what do you see? You see nothing. Enough tradition survives the temple priests who explain to you that it is the most Upanishadic representation of the Shiva Linga. For you must always remember that Linga means the mark, the symbol of the formless eternal. And in all the Indian faiths, it is finally an understanding we seek, a knowledge that we seek of the Nirgun, the Arupa. We use the medium of the many deities who move us, who help us to find that peace and joy within us, who help us to find the grace within us, to prepare our minds in the course of that search for the final knowledge, but that is always expected to be of the Nirgun, the Arupa. And this marvelous temple, the temple priests very proudly say that it has the best representation of the Nirgun aspect of Shiva, as well as the formful aspect of Shiva, the Rupa, for it has the Nataraja in a beautiful representation. Next, please. This is another painting of the ambulatory of the Brihadishvara temple. You might notice the hand which is poised to strike that little drum. You might notice the straps of that drum, which so vividly show us the movement. Indeed, the painter is able to convey exactly what he wishes to. The medium is very much in control. Marvelous paintings of the 10th century. Next, please. Now, this is the earliest known surviving portrait in painting in Indian art. King Rajaraja Chola, standing behind his Guru Karuvara. Now, one of the perhaps one of the most important things about the Indian tradition of art is that for at least 1,500 years, though there was the creation of thousands and thousands of works of art, which brought before us so many deities, and there was the making of so many animals, trees, flowers, so many common people, but there was never a portrait. As a matter of fact, the Chitra Sutra makes it also quite clear that ephemeral personalities personalities like us, which just come and go, are too unimportant to be depicted in something as important as art. Art is for the eternal themes. And this is the tradition of humility, which was not only spoken about or written about, but actually practiced. So you have this huge period of time when great art is being created, but not a single portrait. Here I must also tell you about the exception, which is that during the rule of the Kushanas, who were the Yuchi tribe coming from Central Asia, they had portraits made of themselves in the 1st century, and immediately after them the Indian tradition reverted back to itself. And the first portrait which appears in sculpture is 7th, 8th century at Mabalapuram. And in painting, the earliest one is this, King Rajaraja Chola. Now what's equally interesting to note is that in this early period of time when the king has started breaking with tradition to have himself painted, he is being very careful. King Rajaraja Chola here is standing behind his guru. And so also in other temples from the 10th to the 13th centuries, Konark for instance, and other places, when the king is made, he is usually made very, very small, or otherwise he is made behind the guru, or he is made worshipping a Shivalinga. So it is with such hesitating steps that kings begin to show themselves or give importance to themselves in the Indian tradition. I think it is a marvelous tradition. You may be aware that in the ancient period in India, no homes for any ephemeral personalities, any human beings, were made out of lasting material. They were made out of wood and mud and other things which would not survive. It was only that which was made in the service of the eternal, which was made out of stone. And this tradition begins to change only in the 14th, 15th centuries. At Hampi, we see for the first time plinths of royal structures which are being made of stone. Then later the whole structure begins to be made of stone. Next please. The Alchi monastery in Ladakh, part of a legendary group of 108 monasteries which were made across western Tibet, Ladakh, Lahore, Spiti and Kinnaur in the 10th, 11th centuries. And these were entirely painted and sculpted by artists who were invited from Kashmir. Kashmir was one of the greatest of Hindu centers and Buddhist centers, and one of the greatest Indian philosophers of aesthetics, Abhinav Gupta, also was in Kashmir just before this period. Next please. And these are the marvelous paintings inside the Alchi monastery made by those Kashmiri artists. You would notice that rendering of form which we had spoken about, which comes from the Ajanta tradition onwards. You would notice the protruding further eye, which begins with the medieval tradition in Indian art. You would notice the profusion of textiles, which shows you that it was on an artery of the Silk Route. And most of all, if you look to the sides, you notice these joyous figures on those mythical creatures. And it is a sense of joy which pervades the early art of Kashmir, more than any other artistic tradition. Next, please. Again, from the Alchi monastery, these paintings, particularly in the Alchi monastery, are the only surviving visual record of the early culture of Kashmir. Because in the Kashmir Valley itself, the paintings were destroyed. So here is where we see the architecture, the clothes and lifestyle of ancient Kashmir. This is the only place. And here you see a temple to Balarama with a shrine of the green Tara. For in the ancient period, they were all together. This is something I would be happy to tell you more about. Next, please. In Kinnaur, the monastery of Nako, again an exquisite painting made by the Kashmiri painters. You would notice that lilting grace which reminds you that there is an end to the sorrow of the world. These are very small paintings. This roundel that you see would be only about, it would be less than 2 inches across. So very finely made paintings. Next, please. Lepakshi temple in Andhra Pradesh, 15th century. In procession of Parvati and her attendants. Again, you would notice the marvelous textiles which remind you of the great deal of trade which took place in that period of time, in that place. Next, please. A very rarely seen painting of the 16th century at Fatehpur Sikri, a European woman playing a flute. Actually, what is, we think of the British influence on Indian art, and what is usually forgotten is that the Portuguese came much before the British. So, Father Montserrat and Father Rudolf Aquaviva from St. Paul's College in Old Goa were the guests of Emperor Akbar in Fatehpur Sikri, and they would have been among the earliest people who brought European paintings to the attention of Indian rulers. Next, please. A beautiful Venugopala of the 15th century. There are 15th and 16th century paintings in the Mattancherry Palace in Kerala. And Kerala is one of the places that preserves the high quality of ancient Indian art till a later period than most other places are able to do. You would notice that that wonderful rendering of form and that gentleness of expression. I might mention that we found a very beautiful Venugopala at the great Buddha temple of Nara, and Krishna continues to be very popular in Japan till today. Next, please. The finest art of Rajasthan is to be found in the Amer Palace in a Bhojanshala, and you might notice the smiling elephant and the twinkle in his eye. Worldwide, it has been noted always that the Indian artist has this great sympathy with the animals. Next, please. This is 17th century, the Shivadwara temple at just outside Chamba. The Chamba area preserves a great deal of culture, perhaps better than other parts of Himachal Pradesh. It is less visited by tourists than most other places, and you have early bronzes which are still under worship in many temples. So Chamba is a very fine place. So family of Lord Shiva. The tradition of art of Chamba is almost exactly like that of Kashmir. And on the going on the ancient route, Chamba was not very far from Srinagar, over the mountains. It is today that the motorable roads have been made very differently, and Chamba has become much further away from Kashmir. But whether it is the wooden sculpture of the beautiful temples of Chhatterji and other places in the Chamba region, or whether it is the paintings, the art is practically identical with the art of Kashmir and very sophisticated. Next, please. Viranchi Narayan temple in a Boguda, a very remote part of Odisha. And that is from the Ramayana, Lord Rama and Sita, 17th century. Next, please. The earliest paintings that survive of the churches in Goa, made by Indian artists. And personally, what I found in documenting the art of Goa was that the themes were new, the stories were new, the background and clothing was new for the Indian artists, but the overflowing love which the Indian artist was used to portraying in his own deities, that is where he was able to make his finest of Christian art. And I would like to point out that some of the finest Christian art of the whole world is actually in places like Old Goa and places in South America. It is some of the marvelous local traditions and the spirit of the people in different places, which adds a great deal to what comes to them from the European traditions. So the art of Old Goa is, I think, very valuable to the Christian tradition. Next, please. I mentioned to you the paintings of Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, and indeed you would see whether it is the theme of Apsaras, or whether it is a style of painting, or it is that deeply inward look, that gentleness, you would find the very direct connection to the paintings of Ajanta. Next, please. Shiva and Parvati painted in about the 6th century in China, in the Buddhist Kucha caves, the caves of Kizil at Kucha. The connections with India are absolutely remarkable. Next, please. Birth of Buddha painted in a 12th century painting in Bagan. As I mentioned to you, the art historians of Bagan feel so close to the Indian tradition. These paintings are very similar to the paintings in that period of time in the eastern plains of India, the Pala period paintings. Next, please. And the earliest paintings which survive in Tibet, this is the Dongkar caves in a very high altitude part of western Tibet. This is much further beyond Lake Manasarovar, and at about 14,000 feet altitude from what I remember. So this is 11th, 12th century. Some feel that they are made by the original Kashmiri painters who were invited, but I see here a continuation of the form, but without that subtle grace of the original Kashmiri painters. So I think it is painters who have trained under the Kashmiri painters. In fact, the period of Kashmiri paintings is the period of the finest art of Tibet. And ladies and gentlemen, with this I conclude the presentation which I had brought for you. I'm very happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
One thing that I did not get is, what is the dimension of all these paintings? I mean, is it 10 feet by 10 feet, or 2 feet by 2 feet, or maybe it's all varying, so I didn't have the perspective of the dimensions. And the second question is, what type of material that they used, at that time?
The dimensions vary considerably. The painting at Nako Monastery, which I mentioned to you, was the size of that frame, left to right, which you saw, was not even 2 inches. Whereas the Brihadishvara painting that you saw of the Nataraja, that was about, I think at least 10 feet. So the size varied in each case, and there is so much to talk about each of them that I had not shared the dimensions each time, but I will consider that. And I'm sorry, go to the second, materials. The materials which were used were very simple, natural materials which were available. Red and yellow from ochre, white from lime, black from lamp soot. In the Ajanta paintings, the blue is the one color which came from afar, lapis lazuli from the northwest of India, and some vegetable greens. And these were all blended together. This very simple range of colors was blended together in a very subtle way to produce all the nuances of tones and colors that you see. What is perhaps really remarkable is also that they have survived so well. I mean, colors, paints that we make today do not last for very long. And in all this, in the very high quality of the art, in this technical aspect of how well the colors have survived, in all this I think there is a meditative care, there is a dedication of the artist, which is, I think, most important. In fact, the technological skills, I mean, there are technological wonders that we see in ancient India. At the caves of Ellora, if you look at Cave 16, the great Kailashnath temple, where a huge hill has been cut and transformed into a multi-storied temple structure with different buildings almost, one after the other, and all of them carved from the inside with beautiful pillars and sculptures and painting. It's something which would be very difficult to do even with the, thank you very much, with all the technological skills and resources available to us today, I think it would be impossible to make something like the Kailasnath temple. Just like making paintings of this truly high quality, with this sublime quality, is also something which is perhaps beyond our reach today. Behind it all, more than any purely technical skill, is this great caring with which everything is done, this great dedication with which it is all pursued.
Well, thank you so much. The paintings are amazing, but the way that you captured them in the photographs, that's even better yet. My question is that these colors that you were able to capture, I assume that these are all preserved and they were done in natural light or whatever light was available to you, or was that some extra light that you were able to use to capture all these colors? And second part is that how do you remember all these details about every photograph?
How could I forget them? No, in fact, once you have been with art like this, once you have been moved by art like this, once you've had the good fortune to have caught a glimpse of the philosophic understanding which is behind art like this, you would not want to forget anything. It is, I think, exactly as the Chitra Sutra would say, you know, I mean, the art is really made for the purpose of transforming you, the purpose of emancipating you. And if we were to spend enough time for it, we would all be equally moved by it in an unforgettable way. Now, I'm sorry, the earlier part of the question, yes. No additional light was used. Quite often the caves were very dark, so if you just walk in, you may not immediately be able to see your hand in front of you. But gradually, as your eyes become used to the condition of low light, you will be able to see your hand and see a little bit. And it is in that sort of condition that these photographs were taken at Ajanta.
You know, I have visited, Ram and I have visited Ajanta Aurora 3 times in the last 2 decades, because it's very close to Aurangabad and Pune and all that. But I have not seen anything like this. We went in there, total darkness, and you could make out some little figures, etc. But I was wondering, do you have prints of your photography available so we can get that? So we're going to have to make a 4th trip.
There is an American edition of my book on Ajanta. So this is Thames and Hudson, the Ajanta caves, and maybe some copies of the original hardcover American edition by Harry Abrams might still be available, I'm not very sure. But in any case, the new paperback edition by Thames and Hudson would surely, Amazon.com, these people would have it.
I have a couple of questions. One is, I looked at, there were 2 books. One was published in 1996 or something like that, and the other one 2005. Which one, is that the same book?
Yes, the 2005 would be when the paperback was brought out, and it has a slightly revised introduction. But for the rest, it's the same book.
The other question is, I see that in Kerala, after a temple disaster, they started a school for mural painting, and it's reviving. I've seen some older temples, some people try to redo the pictures using oil paint, some of them whitewash, but recently some paintings have been actually redone with the right method. Is that just only in Kerala, or what is the situation or the state of the art? Because this is a great art that I think we need to preserve. What is the situation that you see in India?
Actually, there are worldwide problems related to this which are also affecting India deeply. Restoration, as they like to say, of paintings should not be done, because every line made by the artist is an expression of himself. In every line, the artist is actually making himself and the grace which he may have within him. So the moment we start redoing a line, and the moment we start redoing the colors, we are in fact interfering in that expression, interfering in a major way. So whether it was the sealing of the Sistine Chapel, which was so widely publicized, or whether it is the temples in Kerala where people with very good intentions, or in other parts of India, are beginning to try to make the paintings look more complete and more colorful again, it's not truly a good idea. They should be preserved as they are. They should not be added upon. It should not be this restoration.
I also meant was the propagation or the learning of that art, where you can apply it to new temples being constructed, not necessarily. I didn't really mean the restoration. Those efforts, I don't see that happening as much as it was before.
Yeah, there are at least two aspects of the learning of the art. One is certain technical skills and guidelines on how to make the art and how to make various deities. But much more important than that is the education of society. What makes this art, what creates this art, or created this art, was this wonderful ethical foundation of early Indian society. I mean, the ethics of Indian society spread far and wide. It went like wildfire across the whole of Asia. In fact, if we have time, we'll also be seeing this film about the Ramayana, which is revered and worshipped across the Asian countries, easily as much as it is revered in India. In fact, I think it's probably more a part of the daily life of the people of so many other countries, more than it is in India. Because in India we have been so preoccupied with modernizing ourselves that we sometimes have forgotten the importance of our spiritual traditions, which some of the other countries may not have forgotten. But it is this great ethical tradition. It is this vision of life where everything is seen through Dharma, which is the important thing. So that is the education which is required to produce the spiritual art.
Hello. I think it was 28 or 30 years ago that you shared with us at my very close friend Udayan Patel's home
the fact that you had just come back from Ajanta and these long exposures and made these photographs. It's taken these many years for me to see them. Thank you so much. It's been way worth waiting for. But I have another thought. The kinds of pilgrimage that you have gone through and what we saw today creates a deep yearning for me, who goes to India pretty much every year. What better than to have you come along and we journey to the places that you already know so well. How about that? Is it possible?
I've never done that before, but we could certainly look into that possibility. And I must say that there is such a deep interest in our culture that I perceive here, and so much warmth towards that tradition which I perceive here that I would love to look into the possibility of doing this.
Great.
That was 26 years ago.
Thank you very much for showing these paintings to us. Anyway, I was fortunate to visit Ellora, Ajanta in mid-1970s. I remember very well at that time a guide took us all these 17 caves or whatever with a candlelight. It was mid-1970s. At that time, I vividly remember all this, but they were doing that. There was scaffoldings inside, they were touching, making some touch-ups or anything. What did they do at that time? Did any paintings touch up? That's one question. Next question is how government of India is protecting these things, especially these Rajaraja caves.
Yeah. About what may have been happening at the time which you saw, you see in the 20s, some Italian restorers were called by the Nizam of Hyderabad, and they covered the paintings with shellac, a kind of varnish, which was then believed to be a good preservative for the paintings. Now that turned out to be a disaster, because with age the shellac became yellow, and it also collected dirt upon it and blackened. So what you most likely would have seen was the layers of shellac being removed, which made the paintings much more visible again. And fortunately, there were no attempts at repainting. In fact, I did examine whatever painted reproductions were made in the past. So that is going back to, about 120, 30 years ago from now, and later, in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 1930s. And I was able to see that this sort of repainting was not done. Also, you'll be happy to know that most of the damage which took place in the paintings was happened probably by the 30s. Subsequently, there does not appear to have been much damage. So that's a good thing. It's only now the visitors to the caves are numerous, and the humidity of their breath and the bacteria contained in their breath is possibly presenting a great challenge.
excellent presentation. In your research, how long did it take to make all these paintings? And also, how many artists were involved and what period of time? Historical facts, if you have any.
Detailed historical facts about this are not available. What I would like to say is that the remarkable thing which you see here is that unlike what you expect today, where if 1,000 works of art are made, there are one or two which may be masterpieces, may be called masterpieces. Now here there is a uniformity in the quality of the work. It is all of it a masterpiece. All the thousands of figures that are made are exquisite. So that is where we are talking about a whole society which consists of much more evolved human beings. And you cannot deny it. The truth of the art, the veracity of the art is undeniable. You can write a history and you can write anything in the history if you want to. But the proof of the art is undeniable. It is remarkable.
To follow up that, who supported all these artists?
That's the other wonderful thing. We did touch upon that. It is not the king. It is the people. The whole of society was patronizing the art. And there were guilds of artists, and the guilds were not being told by each so-called patron, that I want this to be made like this. No. Because then you have hundreds of patrons. The uniformity of the work could not be there if the patrons were trying to have things done their way. You talk about a society which leaves the responsibility of the creation of that art to those whose dharma it is to do it. And their own dharma is to contribute to it. There is much to be learned in this. In fact, one of the very remarkable things about ancient Indian history is that we began in the BC period with remarkable democracies with elected chieftains. Gradually over the centuries the tradition changed to kingship, and then it changed to hereditary kingship. But it is fact very clearly recognized that we began with this remarkable democracy, and the people were very important. It's a society in which people were very important. In fact, Indian society was very educated. Till as late as when I was a child, a very common person in India, it could be a gardener, it could be a maid, a kitchen maid or whatever, could discuss with you sophisticated philosophic concepts of the illusory nature of the material world, Maya or Mithya. Now, here in the Western world you would need professors to be able to attempt to address such a subject or to discuss such a subject. But everybody in that society was so deeply educated in the science of life, in the science of the mind. And when you come through this whole colonial period and you reach the modern period, there may be many people who may not have been literate, may not have spoken in English, but as human beings, They were deeply educated. It's marvelous to visit, for instance, villages in Bengal where you have the baul singers. Now these baul singers are supposed to be, illiterate villagers. Look at what they are singing. They are singing of the deepest philosophic concepts. They are singing about the Nirgun, they are singing about Maya, it's fascinating to hear them. And not only are they singing, but as I found, they are able to discuss all this philosophy in highly nuanced terms. They are deeply aware of it, very, very evolved. And these are the villagers. So somewhere along the line, are we getting educated or are we losing education? We really must keep both kinds of knowledge alive. And the good thing is that the world is beginning to notice Indian spiritual knowledge more and more and more. And working on yoga, Sujata and I are noticing this all the time. Yoga seems to be the thin end of that wedge, which because of the physical nature of, the physical nature also of yoga, people start accepting that, and then behind that comes the whole vision of life of the Indian tradition, which can get shared. The world needs it. We need such a peaceful vision of life.
You may have already partially answered my question, but I have always wondered about the artists, especially in Ajanta and Ellora, because Ajanta was so far away from everything. They went so far away to make these caves. And I had always thought it was some of the monks that did the paintings, but then there's also regular life depicted in those paintings. So I've always been confused about that.
Well, it was not monks, they were guilds of artists. And the same guilds were painting, for Hindu, Jain, Buddhist caves. And as in the case of Chamba today, which has become comparatively remote, today the caves of Ajanta are found by us to be in a remote place. But if you look at the routes of those days, they were very active trade routes. And these would have been on the trade routes. In fact, the viharas would also have been providing shelter to traders. So they were not that remote.
I really enjoyed the presentation and learned a lot. I have two questions. One question, I was just kind of fascinated by the shape of the eyes. And was there a difference between the shape of the eyes between the north and the south? Have you done any research on the southern part of India in terms of paintings? That's one question. And second question was, you said that most of the paintings in the first through 6th century was ordinary men and women. And when did they start painting on deities? Were they worshipping deities in the 1st and 5th centuries?
The tradition of art and the philosophic traditions were remarkably uniform across the subcontinent and simultaneously, in fact, shared with other countries in Asia. In fact, historians are bewildered by the uniformity of the spread. You take any take any period of time, and you find that the same kind of style of art is being followed near Kanyakumari. For instance, at Panimalai, near Kanyakumari, you would find 9th century Jain reliefs on the hillside, which are portraying exactly the same style and exactly the same sort of theme as the paintings being made in Ladakh. So it is not only from Kalagumalai till Ladakh, but the same thing is also happening. Similar things, same things are happening in Myanmar, are happening in Bamiyan, are happening in Indonesia. So the spread of the knowledge is fascinating. And the obvious explanation seems to be that here is a tradition which gives so much importance to knowledge, where the distilled understanding of the finest of intellectuals is put together in sutras. And this knowledge is received with reverence, because the passage of knowledge is not just is not a very simple thing. It is how it is put together, how it travels, and how it is received. There can be a corruption of the knowledge at any stage. But there is a remarkable sharing, I think, through this great importance which is given to knowledge. And yet, there is a great freedom of the artist. That individual expression is there. So it is a marvelous tradition that way.
Fascinating talk, of course. Just a technical question: how did the artists make these paintings in darkness back then? So small, exquisite paintings, and such difficult ones.
It seems that they used reflectors from the outside to push beams of sunlight in, and other reflectors inside which diffuse the light.
Hi, I have one question. I actually have two questions. My first one was the same one that he just asked, but my second part is why choose the inside of a cave to do such brilliant works of art? Who was the audience intended for this artist? Why not create such brilliant pieces of art, masterpieces outside where more people can enjoy it?
When we see some of the early caves, for instance at Karli in Maharashtra, you see, or at Bhaja, even more so maybe, you see in fact that rock is left standing outside the cave to block your view of the entrance of the cave. And the belief is that to gain knowledge you would have to make a lot of effort. It is quite the opposite of modern day dissemination of knowledge, where the knowledge is advertised, where knowledge is sometimes made very easy to accept and digest. And sometimes it is even made according to the way that you would want it to be. This is exactly the opposite. This is the purity of knowledge as it is, and the understanding that you will come to know it. For knowing something is something deep inside. You have knowledge of it, you have experienced it, and that is knowledge. So for that, it is you who have to make the effort. And therefore I imagine that the interior of a cave is a much better place than if it is just there where, a passerby can just see it. A passerby would not have that depth of attention. It's only if you have that attention available, then you will go inside and take the trouble and spend the time to look upon it. Another thing to keep in mind is that it is the noise and clamor of the confusion of the material world around you, Maya or Mithya, which distracts you constantly. So you would like to get away from distracting influences and go into a place where it is possible for you to focus upon that which is truly important, that which is eternal, that which you respond to from inside without the common distractions of the material world around you.
I have a question about the artists. How much is known about the individual artists, their identity, and how critically important is that to understanding the work and the traditions and the history of the art of India?
I think the important lesson of the art of ancient India is that the name of the artist was never written upon his work in the ancient period. In fact, it is all about losing the ego. It is all about losing that sense of the importance of self. That's what, whether it is the art, whether it is the yoga, whether it is the philosophy in any of its forms, is constantly telling you. So in fact, Indians did not believe in the writing of histories. What one silly king comes and does upon the stage for a short while, if he goes to war with somebody else, I mean, this is hardly what is important to remember. What is important is the eternal themes. What is important is that which contributes to your journey within, that which helps you to realize yourself, emancipate yourself. And that is the theme of life. That is the higher purpose of life.
Hello, sir. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and it's beautiful art. And I have one question, I don't know whether you asked about it. The colors you mentioned were basically the natural colors, and what kind of instruments did they use? Brush? They are so nice, and you can see every detail. Especially, I was amazed that jewelry, so exquisite, and I was thinking, some of these jewelers can copy their designs and do it, which is actually coming back the old tradition in the jewelry making. So, if you can highlight anything on that. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure that some designs would have been found useful even almost 100 years ago. I'm sure they've already been copied almost 100 years ago. In fact, when was it? In the late 1920s or something, when the Ajanta ballet was performed in Paris. And I've seen a Times of India report of about 100 years ago, which speaks about how the third attempt is being made by the British government of India to make reproductions of the Ajanta paintings, painted reproductions. Because, as it states, even the designs would be invaluable for all the art schools of Europe. And it is also stating that so many pounds are being granted for the start of the project of this third attempt at reproduction. And the Secretary of State of the British government says that no expense should be spared in a project of such great national importance. So, I mean, until India gained independence, still Ajanta was also considered a part of the British Empire. That is a sort of importance which was being given to Ajanta. Very interestingly, there was one attempt made in which a British painter spent a few years living at Ajanta, painting reproductions of the paintings. Finally, when the reproductions were made, they were shown at the Crystal Palace in England, Sydenham in England. And unfortunately, the exhibition caught fire and they were destroyed. A second round of copies were made. I think this is about probably between 1910 and 20 or something like that. And again, they were displayed at the Crystal Palace. And again, the exhibition caught fire and burnt. So when I took these photographs, and the British Museum invited me to speak and show these, and the Victoria and Albert Museum invited me to speak and show these, and the University of London invited me to show these. There was a joke going around about, which place is going to catch fire now. Luckily, none of them did.
पुनस्त्वादित्या रुद्रावसवः समिन्धताम् पुनः ब्रह्माणो वशुनीतयज्ञैः घृतेन त्वन्तनवो वर्धयस्व सत्याः सन्तु यजमानस्य कामाः नवो नवो भवति जायमानोऽह्नाङ्केतुरुषसामेत्यग्रे भागं देवेभ्यो विदधात्यायन् प्रचन्द्रमा स्थिरति दीर्घमायुः शतमानं भवति शतायुः पुरुषः शतेन्द्रिय आयुष्येवेन्द्रिये प्रतिष्ठति सदा कालारोग्यभाग्यदा सिद्धिरस्तथास्तु।